My name is Mary and I'm 35 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon, which means I'm trained to walk into blood, panic, broken bones, screaming families, and still know exactly what must be done first. In my world, a second of hesitation is the difference between a heartbeat and a flatline. I've spent the last decade of my life in a sterile environment where logic is king and emotions are a luxury I can only afford after the patient is stable. People think surgeons are cold, but we aren't, we're just focused. We have to be. Because when a body is shattered, it doesn't need a hug, it needs a plan. But nothing in an operating room, no matter how chaotic or gruesome, prepared me for the sound I heard when I came home early that Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't the sound of a medical emergency. It was the sound of a soul-breaking. My daughter, Emma, was sobbing inside my own house. It wasn't the "I fell and scraped my knee" kind of cry. It was the kind of terrified, muffled sob that makes a mother stop breathing before she even understands why. It's a sound that hits you in the gut and bypasses the brain entirely. I stood at my front door, my hand still gripping the cold brass handle. I had just finished a 16-hour shift. My scrubs were wrinkled, my eyes were burning from the hospital lights, and all I wanted was to hug my 8-year-old girl and sleep for 1,000 years. But the atmosphere in the hallway felt heavy, like the air right before a thunderstorm. I pushed the front door open wider, moving with the silence I'd practiced during 1,000 night shifts, and froze just long enough to see the truth. My father, Charles, was in my living room. He wasn't there for a visit. He was standing over Emma, his face flushed with a dark, mottled rage, yelling threats at a child who looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. While he played the role of the monster in the living room, my older sister, Rachel, was tearing through my bedroom. I could hear the rhythmic, violent sound of wood hitting wood, drawers being pulled out and dumped. She was moving like a thief who already believed she deserved everything she touched. The surgeon in me tried to triage the scene instantly. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Child first. Emma was the priority. She was backed against the bookshelf, her small hands clutching a stuffed fox I'd bought her for her last birthday. Exit second. Could I get her out without them seeing me? Threat assessment. Charles was towering over her, his hand braced on the wall, blocking the hallway as if my home, the home I had paid for with every grueling hour of my residency, belonged to him. Evidence fourth. My bedroom door was wide open at the end of the hall. I saw Rachel emerge for a split second, holding my mother's old mahogany jewelry box. She didn't even look guilty. She looked frustrated, like she was looking for something and the pearls weren't enough. Papers from my file cabinet were already scattered across the hallway like autumn leaves. Someone had searched for the deed, the apartment documents, and the blue folder I kept locked away for a very specific reason. The mother in me wanted to run straight at them, to scream, to use every ounce of the strength I'd built up to throw them out. But the surgeon in me knew that an emotional frontal assault against two desperate people was a recipe for disaster. Instead, I stepped back into the shadow beside the hallway, pulled out my phone with trembling fingers, and dialed 911 without making a sound. When the operator answered, I whispered, "My family broke into my house. They're threatening my daughter. Send police now. 420 Oak Street. Please, hurry." Before I tell you what they were really searching for, and why the sirens outside ruined far more than their afternoon, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like where you are? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The operator told me to stay on the line, and I did. I tucked the phone into the pocket of my scrubs, the line still open, acting as a silent witness. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to rush into that room, but I had to wait. Emma was only 8. She was being brave in that heartbreaking way children try to be when the adults who are supposed to protect them become the source of their terror. She was silent, stiff, trying not to make things worse by crying louder. "Tell me where your mother keeps the blue folder." Charles snapped, his voice was a serrated blade, cutting through the silence of the house. "Don't act stupid, Emma. You've seen it. She brings it out every month." "Where is it?" Emma's voice was a tiny, broken thread. "I don't know. I don't know where Mom puts things. She's lying. Rachel yelled from the bedroom. I heard the sharp, sickening crack of something fragile breaking, a porcelain vase my mother had given me. Mary always hides things. Jewelry, contracts, bank papers. She thinks she's better than us just because she has a title in front of her name. She's always been selfish. My hand tightened around the phone in my pocket. I was still half hidden behind the hallway corner. In the operating room, panic kills people faster than injured. I forced myself to breathe. I checked Charles's hands. No weapon, but his size was enough of a threat to an 8-year-old. I checked Emma's distance from him. Too close. I looked at the floor and saw Rachel's bag on my bed, heavy, open, stuffed with my life. My mother's pearl necklace was already visible, draped over the edge of the leather. That necklace had been left to me in my mother's will, along with a small share in an apartment building she had quietly invested in years before she died. My mother knew our family. She knew Charles's gambling and Rachel's inability to keep a job. She had left me those shares because she knew I was the only one who wouldn't squander them. Charles had always called it family property, even though the paperwork said otherwise. Rachel had always called it unfair, even though she had received her own inheritance and burned through it within 3 years on designer clothes and bad boyfriends. I had helped them more times than I wanted to admit. I paid Charles's property taxes twice when he said he was about to lose his land. I gave Rachel money for a divorce attorney when she swore she would pay me back every cent. I covered medical bills, car repairs, hotel stays, emergency loans that were never emergencies once the check cleared. I even missed Emma's school recital once because Charles called me in tears, saying the bank was about to take everything, only for me to learn later he had used part of the money on a hunting trip to Canada. Each time I told myself love meant patience. Each time, they learned that my guilt had a dollar amount. But I never signed over my house. I never signed over my apartment shares. And I never, ever gave them access to the trust one had created for Emma's future. Now, I finally understood why they had waited until today. My hospital schedule was public knowledge for the family. They thought I would be stuck in the ER until 8 p.m. They didn't come to ask for help. They came to corner my child, steal the physical documents they needed to forge my signature, and force me to surrender. Charles lowered his voice, which was somehow more terrifying. Listen to me, little girl. Your mother is selfish. If she loved this family, she would help us. People are going to lose their homes because of her. If she doesn't sign those papers, bad things are going to happen. You don't want your grandpa to be homeless, do you? Emma whispered, her voice barely audible, please don't yell. I want my mom. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not calm, not peaceful, surgical. Precise. I had seen families collapse in waiting rooms when fear made them cruel. But this was not fear. This was a calculated strike against a child to get to a bank account. Rachel came out of my bedroom, sweating, holding a stack of documents. I found copies of the apartment agreement, but not the transfer certificate. She must have moved it to the safe deposit box. Charles cursed, the sound echoing off the walls. Then we make her sign new ones. We stay here until she walks through that door. Rachel laughed, a bitter, breathless sound. You think she'll sign after this? Look at the house, Dad. She'll call the cops the second she sees us. She won't, Charles said, looking down at Emma. She will if she wants her daughter to stop being scared. She'll sign anything to make this stop. The operator's voice came quietly through my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out slightly. Officers are 2 minutes out. Are you safe? I whispered, not yet. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. If I waited for the police to burst in, the situation might escalate. I needed to draw their attention away from Emma. I needed to be the target. I lifted the phone just enough to keep recording, took a deep breath, and stepped into the living room. When I stepped onto the hardwood, the floorboards didn't even creak. I was used to walking through hospital wards without waking the sleeping. Emma saw me first. Her face changed so fast it nearly broke my heart into a million pieces. Hope, shame, fear, and a massive wave of relief flashed across her eyes. She tried to stand, but her legs were shaking too much. Charles spun around, startled. "Mary," he barked, as if I was the intruder in my own home. He tried to recover his composure, puffing out his chest. Rachel appeared behind him, clutching the property folder in one hand and my mother's pearls in the other. For 1 second, nobody moved. The clock on the mantel ticked. The hum of the refrigerator felt like a roar. Then I said the only 3 words that mattered. "Emma, come to me." Charles shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing as if he wanted to block her path. I didn't wait for his permission. I raised my phone, showing him the screen. "Don't you dare move, Charles." He looked at the phone, then at my face. He saw the coldness there, the look I use when I'm telling a family that their loved one didn't make it. It's a look that leaves no room for negotiation. "Are you recording us?" he asked, his voice wavering between anger and disbelief. "Yes," I said, my voice as steady as a scalpel. Rachel's expression twisted into a sneer. "You psycho. You're recording your own family? After everything we've been through? We're just trying to talk to you." "No," I replied. "I'm recording 2 adults who broke into my house, stole my jewelry, threatened my 8-year-old daughter, and searched for legal documents they have no right to touch. That's not a family talk, Rachel. That's a felony." Charles took 1 step toward me, his face darkening. "Careful how you talk to your father, Mary. You've forgotten where you came from. You think that white coat makes you better than the people who raised you?" That sentence might have worked on me 10 years earlier. Maybe even 5. Back then, I still believed respect meant obedience. I still believed helping family meant bleeding quietly so they could call it love. But when I saw Emma finally reach my side and hide behind my leg, shaking so hard her fingers dug into my scrubs, every old rule died. "You are not in charge here," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "This is my house. Those are my documents. That is my child. And you are about to realize exactly how much I've changed." Rachel threw the folder onto the coffee table in a fit of pique. Paper slid across the glass. "Your house. Your documents. Your child. That's always the problem with you, Mary. Everything is yours. You've become so greedy." "I worked for it," I said. "Every single brick. Every single cent. While you were finding yourself on my dime, I was doing 80-hour weeks and skipping meals." Charles laughed, but his face had gone pale around the mouth. He heard something I heard, the faint, distant wail of a siren. He tried to ignore it. "You think being a doctor makes you untouchable? We made sacrifices for you so you could go to med school." "You didn't make sacrifices," I shot back. "You made loans out of my guilt. And I paid them back with interest until I finally learned the difference between helping someone and being hunted by them." Rachel's eyes flickered toward the window. The sirens were getting louder. She hadn't expected this. She thought I would walk in, cry, argue, and eventually give in to keep the peace. She didn't realize that when you threaten a surgeon's child, you don't get a sister, you get a witness. "How did you get in?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Charles crossed his arms, trying to look intimidating. "Don't start with the interrogation, Mary. We have a family emergency and you weren't answering your phone." "How did you get into my locked house?" I repeated. I looked at Rachel's bag. I remembered her coming over for Emma's birthday 3 weeks ago. She had helped me clean up in the kitchen. "You took my spare key from the drawer, didn't you, Rachel?" She snapped. "That's not the point. The point is we need that apartment share transferred today or the lenders are going to come for Dad's land." Charles slammed his hand on the coffee table so hard the glass rattled. Emma flinched against my leg. My arm went around her immediately, pulling her tight. "Sign the papers, Mary," he growled. "Rachel's lender needs collateral. If you transfer your share temporarily, we can fix everything." It's just a signature. Temporarily, I repeated, a cold smile touching my lips. Is that what you call forging my name on a blank transfer form? I saw what was in that folder. His eyes narrowed to slits. Nobody forged anything yet. We were going to ask you. I turned my phone screen toward them so they could see the active call timer. The police are turning onto the street. You have exactly 30 seconds to decide if you're going to walk out with your hands up or if they're going to have to drag you out. For the first time, a heavy, suffocating silence hit the room outside. The sirens cut through the Montana air, loud and demanding. Charles's face changed from rage to a frantic, ugly calculation. He looked at the door, then at me, then at the papers on the table. Mary, listen to me, he said, his voice suddenly oily and pleading. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you overreacted. We're family. You don't want your father in handcuffs, do you? Think of the scandal. Think of what people at the hospital will say. Rachel stepped closer, her eyes wide and desperate. Please, Mary. You don't understand what this will do to us. I'll lose my job if I have a record. I looked down at Emmett. I thought about the hours she spent crying while they stood over her. I thought about the broken vase and the stolen pearls. I looked back at my sister and my father, the people who were supposed to be my safety net, but had instead become the hole I kept falling into. You still think this is about what happens to you? I said. The blue and red lights began to flash against the living room walls, reflecting off the family photos they had ignored while they trashed the place. Charles took a step toward me, reaching for my wrist, his voice a low warning. You are making a mistake you can't undo, Mary. I didn't flinch. No, I said, as the front door was kicked open by the first responding officer. For once in my life, I'm doing something exactly right. As the officers flooded the room, the real reason they wanted that blue folder began to surface, and it was a secret far darker than a simple debt. As the officers flooded the room, the real reason they wanted that blue folder began to surface, and it was a secret far darker than a simple debt. Officer Williams kept his hand on his holster, not because he was going to draw, but to establish a boundary that my father, Charles, was clearly used to crossing. He stood there, chest puffed out, trying to use his age and his father's status as a shield. This is a domestic matter, officer, he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound more authoritative. My daughter is a high-stress surgeon. She's overworked. She's seeing things that aren't there. We're just here to help her manage her estate. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I simply walked over to the kitchen island, picked up my tablet, and swiped to the security footage from 40 minutes ago. I turned the screen toward the officers. The video was crystal clear. It showed Rachel using a stolen key to enter. It showed them walking straight to my bedroom. It showed Charles pinning Emma into the corner of the living room while she sobbed, his finger inches from her face as he hissed, "Tell me where she keeps the blue folder, or your mother loses everything." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The domestic misunderstanding mask Charles was wearing cracked. Officer Thompson looked at the screen, then at Charles, then at Emma, who was still trembling against my side. "Sir, put your hands behind your back," Thompson said. Rachel started to shriek. "It's our mother's property. Mary is hoarding it. She's worth millions and she's letting her own father starve." She reached for her bag, the one she'd stuffed my mother's pearls into, but Thompson was faster. He snatched the bag away. When he opened it, he didn't just find jewelry. He pulled out a stack of documents that made my stomach turn. It wasn't just the apartment transfer. There were credit card applications in my name. There were forged power of attorney forms. And there was a copy of Forbes magazine, the issue that was set to hit the stands the following Monday. The cover featured a high-resolution photo of me in my scrubs, standing in the center of the trauma bay I had revolutionized with a new surgical triage software I'd developed in my spare time. The headline read, "The surgeon who solved the triage crisis, Mary's multi-million-dollar innovation." That was it. That was the emergency. They didn't just want the apartment shares. They had seen the pre-release announcement of my success. They saw the valuation of my tech company. They realized the unsuccessful daughter, the one they told would never amount to anything because I was too emotional and too focused on books, was now a titan in the medical tech industry. You were never going to tell us, were you? Charles spat as the handcuffs clicked shut. He didn't look like a grandfather in that moment, he looked like a stranger. You were going to keep all that for yourself. After everything we did for you. We gave you a family. We gave you a name. You gave me a name you tried to use as a master key to my bank account, I said, my voice as steady as it is when I'm closing an arterial bleed. You didn't come here because you were in trouble, Dad. You came here because you realized I was worth more than you could ever steal. As they led them out, the neighbors were already on their porches. In a small town, a police car in a surgeon's driveway is front-page news. Rachel was still screaming, her voice echoing off the houses I'd worked 3 jobs to afford. She's a monster. She's arresting her own sister. But the neighbors saw the truth, they saw the broken vase on my porch. They saw the look of pure terror on an 8-year-old's face. Once the house was empty of everyone but the officers and us, the silence felt heavy. I took Emma to the kitchen and made her a glass of water. My hands were shaking, but I kept them under the counter so she wouldn't see. Are they going to jail, Mommy? She asked, her voice small and brittle. They have to answer for what they did, Emma. That's how the world works. Officer Williams stayed behind to take a full statement. He sat at my table, looking at the Forbes cover. You're a long way from the hospital today, Dr. Mary, he said quietly. This is a lot of evidence. The forgery alone is a felony. But the child endangerment, that's what's going to stick. I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent, I said. No hesitation. No, but their family caveats. I had spent 35 years being the good daughter, the one who paid for the mistakes of people who never learned from them. That version of Mary died the moment I heard Emma cry. Over the next few days, the fallout was a tidal wave. Charles and Rachel were held on bail, and because they had spent every cent they ever had, they couldn't pay it. I refused to post it. Then came the calls. My phone didn't stop. Uncles I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Cousins who only texted on Christmas. Everyone had an opinion. Mary, he's an old man, my Aunt Sarah cried into the voicemail. You're going to let him die in a cell over some papers? Think of the scandal. You're on the cover of a magazine. You can't have this in the news. That was the recurring theme, the scandal. To them, the crime wasn't the break-in. The crime wasn't the trauma they caused Emma. The crime was me refusing to hide it. They wanted me to protect the family image at the cost of my own daughter's safety. I ignored the calls. I hired a private security firm to sit in a black SUV at the end of my driveway. I changed every lock to biometric scanners. I didn't care about the scandal. I cared about the fact that Emma wouldn't sleep in her own bed anymore. She insisted on sleeping on a pallet on my floor, her hand reaching out every few hours to make sure I was still there. Every time I looked at her, my resolve hardened. I went back to the hospital 4 days later. Surgery is a sanctuary for me. In the OR, there is no ambiguity. There is a problem and there is a solution. You cut out the necrosis so the rest of the body can live. That's exactly what I was doing with my life. On Wednesday, my attorney, Kevin, called me into his office. He had a grim expression. Mary, we found the notary. The one who stamped the forged papers? Yes. It was a friend of Rachel's. A guy she's been seeing. He's already flipped. He's terrified of being disbarred or facing prison time. He admitted that Charles and Rachel told him you had already agreed to the transfer but were too busy at the hospital to sign. He's giving the DA everything. Text messages, emails. They've been planning this for months, Mary, since before the Forbes interview even went live. They saw a draft of the press release at a local business mixer and started the clock. I leaned back in the leather chair, feeling a cold numbness spread through my chest. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a desperate move by people in a hole. It was a calculated, long-term heist. They had been watching my schedule, waiting for a day when I had back-to-back surgeries so they could corner Emma and finish the paperwork before I even got home. They were going to take the apartment shares, sell them to a developer Rachel knew, and move the money into an offshore account Charles has had for years, Kevin continued, sliding a folder toward me. They weren't just looking for a loan. They were looking to liquidate your mother's legacy and vanish. And what about Emma? I asked, my voice a whisper. What was the plan for her? Kevin looked away. According to the notary's statement, Rachel told him that once the papers were signed, you wouldn't dare call the police because you'd be too afraid of the custody battle Charles would threaten you with. They were going to claim you were an unfit mother because of your obsessive work hours. I stood up so fast the chair hit the wall. The room felt like it was spinning. They were going to use my career, the career I spent a decade of sleepless nights building, as a weapon to take my child. They were going to paint me as the absent doctor to justify their theft. I want the civil suit ready by Friday, I told Kevin. I want a restraining order that covers every mile of the state. I want their names dragged through every legal channel we have. Mary, the media is starting to catch wind of this, Kevin warned. A local reporter found the arrest record. Forbes cover star arrests own father. It's going to be a circus. Let it be a circus, I said, grabbing my bag. I've spent my life being the audience for their drama. It's time they saw what happens when I'm the one in charge of the ending. I walked out of the office and straight to my car. I didn't go home. I went to the jail. I needed to see him. I needed to see Charles one last time before the trial started. When he was led into the visiting room, he looked older. He hadn't shaved, and the orange jumpsuit hung off his frame. But when he saw me, he didn't look remorseful. He looked smug. He sat down and picked up the phone. I knew you'd come, he said. The guilt is a powerful thing, isn't it, Mary? You can't stand the thought of me in here. I'm not here because of guilt, Charles, I said. I didn't call him Dad. That word didn't fit him anymore. I'm here to tell you that I found the notary. I know about the offshore account. I know about the plan to use a custody threat against me. The smugness vanished. His face went pale, a sickly gray color that matched the walls. You think you're so smart, he hissed, his voice cracking. You think that magazine makes you a queen? You're just a girl from a trailer park who got lucky with a scalpel. You owe us everything. We sacrificed for you. You sacrificed nothing, I said, leaning in. You took my mother's money, you took my sister's potential by teaching her how to be a parasite, and you tried to take my daughter's peace. But here's the update, the developer Rachel was talking to? I bought his firm this morning. The offshore account? The DA has a freeze order on it. And the Forbes cover? It's already in the mail to every person you've ever tried to impress. I stood up, hanging the phone back on the hook. He started banging on the glass, screaming something I couldn't hear, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. I walked out of that jail feeling lighter than I had in years. But as I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. One sentence that made my blood run cold. Asterisk, you think a jail cell can stop a family that has nothing left to lose? Asterisk. I looked around the parking lot. It was empty, save for a few cars and a white van idling near the exit. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I realized then that while Charles was behind bars, Rachel's friends, the people she owed money to, the people who were expecting a payout from my apartment shares, were still out there. And they weren't interested in my Forbes cover. They were interested in the woman who had just cost them millions. I jumped into my car and locked the doors, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I called the security team I'd hired. Check the house. Check Emma. Now. We're here, Dr. Mary. Everything is clear. Why? I just got a threat. I'm coming home. Don't let anyone, and I mean anyone, past that gate. As I tore out of the parking lot, the white van followed. They didn't even try to be subtle. I was a trauma surgeon. I was trained to handle life and death. But as the van sped up, clipping the corner of my bumper, I realized that the real surgery was only just beginning. And this time, I wasn't just cutting out the past. I was fighting for the future. The van didn't let up, its headlights flashing in my rearview mirror like the eyes of a predator. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. In the operating room, I make split-second decisions under the highest pressure imaginable. I didn't panic. I steered my car toward the well-lit entrance of the local precinct, my hand steady on the wheel even as the van tried to pit maneuver me one last time. As I swerved into the police lot, sirens erupted from the station doors. My security team had coordinated with the officers on duty. The van screeched to a halt, 3 men jumping out only to be met by a dozen drawn weapons. They weren't just Rachel's friends, they were the associates of the predatory lenders she had been using to fund her lifestyle. When they were cuffed, one of them started shouting about the money Rachel had promised them, money that was supposed to come from my estate. The evidence from that night was the final nail in the coffin. Rachel hadn't just broken into my house, she had conspired with criminals to intimidate a witness during the trial. The family loyalty she and Charles had weaponized for decades finally evaporated. Faced with decades of prison time, Rachel turned on our father, admitting that Charles had been the architect of the entire plan to seize my assets. Charles sat in that courtroom, his face turning a ghostly white as the judge read the sentencing. Felony burglary, conspiracy, and child endangerment. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Rachel, for her cooperation and her lesser role in the planning, received 3 years of house arrest and a permanent criminal record that effectively ended any hope of her ever touching a legal document again. A month later, the October issue of Forbes finally hit the stands. I stood in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows where I had recently installed reinforced glass. On the cover, I looked exactly like who I am, Dr. Mary, a woman who saved lives by day and protected her own by night. The headline read, "The Surgeon of Scale, How Dr. Mary is Redefining Medical Equity." I sent a copy to the prison. Not out of spite, but as a final statement. My family said I'd never be successful because I wouldn't play by their rules. They thought success was something you stole or begged for. They saw my face on that cover and realized that while they were fighting over the scraps of the past, I had built a future they could no longer even touch. Emma walked into the kitchen, looking at the magazine. "You look brave, Mom," she said, her voice finally free of the tremors that had haunted her for weeks. "I am brave," I told her, pulling her into a hug. "And so are you. Success isn't the money in the bank or the title on a door. It's the ability to look at your child and know they are safe because you had the courage to cut out the rot, even when that rot had a family name. If you were in my position, would you have protected your father and sister one last time, or would you have chosen your child's peace over their presence? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for following my journey from the trailer park to the operating room and finally to the truth. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Until next time, stay strong and keep your boundaries firm. All events and characters are fictional and made only for entertainment purposes. We hope it reminds you that your worth is not defined by those who try to bring you down.